March 23, 1945, at 2100 hours. The western shore of the Rhine River near Wesel, Germany. The binoculars trembled almost unnoticeably as Aust Wilhelm Steinberg swept the dimming river waters with his gaze, making notes in his field logbook that would later turn up within the captured German records at Army Group headquarters. The Americans have arrived at our hallowed river, but it is impassable to them. No opposing force has ever breached the Rhine in the face of resolute German defense without the aid of bridges. In the encroaching twilight, he had just witnessed an occurrence affirming 3 years of Wehrmacht defensive principles. Bursts of artillery lit up the western riverside, thousands of cannons getting ready for what German leaders anticipated would be a conventional river crossing, demanding days of groundwork, established bridge-building actions, and exposed crossing zones. Their 88mm cannons stood ready to destroy these systematically. Inside Germany, the Rhine had served as the nation's shield for 2,000 years. Even at this moment, with the Reich collapsing from the east and the west, military engineers continued to reassure their superiors that the river's 1,300-foot breadth and rapid flow rendered a crossing impossible without protracted engineering efforts. 2,000 troops from the 51st Highland Division's 7th Battalion, Black Watch, were getting ready to move into the river. Not in exposed assault boats that would be repeatedly ferried under enemy fire, nor waiting for engineers to finish pontoon bridges amidst shelling, but using vehicles that German intelligence disastrously failed to evaluate accurately. The odd, boat-like trucks named DUKW had been seen in Normandy and Italy, but Wehrmacht intelligence experts disregarded them as specialized equipment for landing on beaches, with no significance for river combat. The calculations defending the Rhine were about to be undone not through greater firepower or massive numbers, but by American technical innovation that German soldiers had never expected would be used against their final natural line of defense. A complete breakdown in intelligence that would turn Germany's supposedly impenetrable moat into a thoroughfare for Allied tanks. Months before, German intelligence analyses had already begun to show signs of failure. Oberst Gab Blumentritt, who served as Chief of Staff under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, would later inform Allied interrogators about the Wehrmacht's crucial misjudgment of American amphibious strength. Reports from engagements in Sicily, Salerno, and Normandy mentioned Schwimmbahn, or amphibious trucks, but German intelligence categorized these with other peculiar American indulgences, such as ships for ice cream and units dedicated to Coca-Cola. Among those defending was Major Hans Georg Model, the son of Field Marshal Walter Model, who served with the 1st Parachute Army. His private journal, which was seized following his capitulation in April 1945, would allow historians to examine German beliefs regarding Rhine defensive strategies. The Wehrmacht's top officers experts in river crossings from the Dnieper to the Seine felt certain they knew the unchangeable principles governing amphibious attacks. They insisted that attackers must have massive advantages in artillery, access to specialized bridging gear, and, most importantly, time to set up crossing sites that defenders could strike. However, the initial true exposure of German misunderstanding was in their evaluation files found at captured command posts. Hetman Friedrich Wenzel, serving as an intelligence officer for the 15th Army, had produced documents reviewing Allied hardware that referred to the DUKW precisely 3 times over half a year of records. Every mention disregarded DUKWs as vehicles suitable only for operations along coasts, claiming they had no place in river fighting. The documentation asserted that American troops probably had between 50 and 100 of these vehicles throughout Europe. In reality, the numbers were immense. By March 1945, there were more than 2,000 DUKWs functioning in the European theater. The U.S. Army structured these into dedicated amphibious truck companies, each one equipped with 50 machines and trained operators. These companies had been rehearsing river crossing missions since Normandy, creating tactics unnoticed by German spies. Britain received 2,000 DUKWs thanks to Lend-Lease and applied their own tactical improvements. Canadian units deployed 800 DUKWs, each outfitted with specific winter adaptations. The innovation behind the DUKW was a prime example of American engineering efficiency. In April 1942, after a Coast Guard patrol vessel became stranded on a sandbar near Provincetown, Massachusetts, regular trucks were unable to access it because of waves and sand. This seemingly inconsequential episode sparked a game-changing development in amphibious tactics that would play a key role in defeating Nazi Germany. Palmer-clad Putnam, affiliated with the Office of Scientific Research and Development, collaborated with yacht designer Rod Stevens Jr. and engineer Dennis Piston to create a vehicle that could effortlessly move from water to shore. When Ford declined to build the vehicle, arguing the deadline couldn't be met, General Motors Corporation took on the task on April 23, 1942. At their yellow truck and coach manufacturing company in Pontiac, Michigan, GMC's engineering staff worked continuously without pause. By June 2, 1942, only 38 days later, the maiden model was finished. The truck featured the standard GMC CCKW 2.5-ton platform underneath a water-sealed hull, which had been drafted by Sparkman and Stevens Yacht Architects. The name DUKW stemmed from GMC's naming convention: D for the 1942 model year, U for utility, K for all-wheel drive, and W for the presence of dual rear axles. The DUKW's adaptability was the result of various remarkable inventions. Frank Spear, a member of GMC's engineering staff, invented the Central Tire Inflation System, CTIS, the globe's inaugural setup of its kind, enabling operators to change tire pressure during motion. When inflated to 10 to 12 pounds per square inch, tires expanded to maximize their grip in sand and mud. At 40 to 45 psi, they ensured effective operation on roads. Water movement at 5.5 knots was achieved by means of a 25-inch propeller powered via a transfer case from the main transmission, while a rudder attached to the steering mechanism provided effortless changeover from aquatic to terrestrial steering. Major General Jacob Dease witnessed the earliest test in June 1942 and placed an immediate order for mass manufacture. The first agreement stipulated a total of 2,000 vehicles. By the conflict's conclusion, GMC had turned out 21,147 DUKWs, reaching extraordinary output rates of 525 monthly at their peak, each priced at $10,750. That sum represented the price of about 7 Jeeps, but for a machine whose utility would become incalculable. In March 1945, the German Rhine defenses were in disarray that Wehrmacht officers refused to admit even in their own minds. General Alfred Schlemm's 1st Parachute Army, the most efficient German force left on the Western Front, had been exhausted in the Reichswald fighting, taking 90,000 casualties either killed, wounded, or captured. Reinforcements arriving at the Rhine were Volkssturm contingents, elderly men and boys with only a handful of weeks' preparation, using captured armaments and wearing armbands rather than formal uniforms. Feldwebel Otto Kraus, posted with the 181st Infantry Division near Wesel, wrote a letter to his wife on March 20. "The Americans are opposite us now, by the thousands. Their vehicles are audible constantly, day and night. Still, the Rhine shields us. Not even Napoleon managed to force the Rhine against resistance. Our engineers have demolished every bridge and all conceivable crossing sites are targeted by our artillery." On paper, the defensive measures seemed formidable. Since September 1944, over 200,000 civilians had been drafted to reinforce the West Wall and its extensions toward the Rhine. 3,000 bunkers and gun emplacements had been set up or renovated. The river itself served as what German tactical manuals termed the ideal water barrier: overly broad for assault bridges, overly fast for boats, and too deep to ford. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who took command of the West after von Rundstedt's removal, delivered orders encapsulating German beliefs. The foe will need between 48 and 72 hours after the first crossings to establish real bridgeheads. This span gives us a chance to strike back with our mobile reserves. Those mobile reserves were made up of the 47th Panzer Corps, which included around 150 functioning armored vehicles, tanks, assault guns, and tank destroyers spread over nearly 200 miles. Yet the greatest German error was one of doctrine. Wehrmacht regulations, refined across half a decade of conflict, dictated that river crossings be conducted as phased actions. First, defenders were neutralized by artillery. Next, infantry would cross using assault craft. Small bridgeheads were to be formed. Subsequently, bridges could be assembled amid enemy fire. Reinforcements would stream over as spans became usable, and only then would armor be sent across. Every segment gave defenders the chance to focus their firepower and attempt counterattacks. Without the Germans' knowledge, the Allies had stationed the largest gathering of amphibious vehicles ever seen on the Rhine's western shore. By March 22, 1945, hundreds of DUKWs were hidden within 5 miles of the intended crossing locations. All vehicles were waterproofed, thoroughly examined mechanically, and equipped with purpose-loaded cargo manifests to ensure their stability afloat. Lieutenant Colonel William Thompson, leader of the 458th Amphibious Truck Company, remembered the painstaking planning. "We realized this was nothing like Normandy with tides and beach obstacles. The Rhine demanded attention to the current, embarkation points, and artillery coordination so we wouldn't end up under our own bombardment. For 2 weeks, we practiced on the Moss River, getting used to how DUKWs performed in swift water. The trucks themselves had adopted modifications from 3 years of war. Armored plates shielded both the drivers and key mechanical parts. Ring mounts for .50 caliber machine guns were installed for defensive fire. Most significantly, specially designed bilge pumps allowed continued operation even if small arms fire punctured the hull." Captain James Mitchell of the 819th Amphibious Truck Company recounted the final orders. "We were told the plan was unique. To use the DUKWs as the initial assault transport in a major river invasion. Not as backup craft, not as supply haulers following establishment of bridges, but as the force's very front line. Each vehicle would carry a complete rifle squad with all their equipment, traverse the Rhine, climb the east bank, and deploy troops directly into frontline engagements." British units possessed their own amphibious machinery. Major General Percy Hobart's 79th Armored Division had brought 600 LVT-4 Buffalo amphibians, each with a 30-man capacity. These would be used in concert with the American DUKWs in what became the most extensive military river crossing ever attempted. Nevertheless, it would be the DUKW's facility for moving instantly between water and land that would most effectively shatter German predications. At 1700 on March 23, 1945, the Rhine operation's largest artillery assault began. More than 4,000 Allied artillery pieces ranging from 25-pounders up to 240 mm howitzers opened up a 4-hour barrage that seemed to make the very atmosphere turn into an impenetrable field of metal and explosions. On the German side, observers described the far bank as seething from the impacts of thousands of projectiles every minute. Gertrud Heinrich Müller, stationed at an observation site near Wessel, tried counting the muzzle flashes on the opposite side. "I stopped at 500. It resembled a continuous strip of fire extending north and south as far as I could see. The sound was indescribable, no individual bursts, merely a single endless thunder that rendered coherent thought unattainable." Shielded by this shelling and the covering darkness, the first DUKWs drove into the Rhine at 2,100. Leading the charge was the 51st Highland Division, with the 7th Battalion Black Watch embarked in DUKWs manned by American troops. Every DUKW transported 12 soldiers with their combat gear and a 2-person crew. Navigation lights were masked and arranged so only followers on the water could see entry and exit points. Sergeant Robert McPherson of the Black Watch described it this way: "We drove down the embankment and abruptly found ourselves afloat. The American operator just continued as if on land, though now we had water churning beside us. The motor's roar was immense, and German shells were splashing around, though darkness and smoke made everything invisible. The main channel's current surpassed predictions at 8 to 10 knots. The DUKWs were launched above their target landing areas, and drivers calculated their drift, likening it to aviators navigating crosswinds. Some ended up hundreds of yards downstream, but the DUKW's design allowed them to climb out on any gentle enough bank. By 2200, the foremost group had reached the far side. German units expecting boats to recross for subsequent waves instead noticed only the ongoing din of the guns. The DUKWs had just motored straight up the east banks and vanished into darkness, their riders already launching attacks from unexpected sectors. As March 24 began, German leadership started getting field reports that defied logical interpretation. Enemy elements, sometimes whole battalions with ample equipment and arms, were turning up far inland from any recognized crossing. There was no sign of the cautious bridgehead development Germans had anticipated. Rather, the Allied troops seemed to materialize in all sectors simultaneously. Headman Karl Richet, in command of an 88mm gun battery set up to protect the crossing location at Rhine, communicated with divisional headquarters, stating, "Enemy armored vehicles are to our rear. I repeat, enemy armor is behind our position. How did they manage to cross? All bridges have been destroyed. We have observed no signs of pontoon bridges being built." What Reich actually encountered were not tanks, but instead DUKWs transporting infantry support arms, such as mortars, machine guns, and anti-tank guns, which had journeyed straight from the Rhine to spots 3 miles inland. The amphibious nature of these vehicles enabled them to circumvent German defensive positions guarding the expected routes from the riverside. As the morning mist receded, the magnitude of the operation came into focus. Countless DUKWs were moving back and forth across the Rhine in steady flows. Unlike assault boats requiring engineer teams and restricted to perpendicular crossings at specially made locations, DUKWs could enter and leave the river wherever the banks allowed. German artillery spotters observed amphibious trucks crossing at numerous locations along an expanse of 22 miles. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann, the operations officer for the 185th Division, noted in his war journal, "The enemy has brought into play a kind of amphibious vehicle in quantities beyond anything we foresaw. Our defensive scheme was based on 6 to 8 crossing sites, which we could hit with focused artillery. In reality, they are fording the river at every imaginable place. Our guns simply cannot address that many targets at one time." At Wesel, the British Second Army's assault utilized a formidable blend of DUKWs and Buffalo LVTs. The 15th Scottish Division crossed the river in buffaloes, while DUKWs delivered their heavy armament and logistical supplies. By 0800, despite strong opposition from the 1st Parachute Army, 3 whole divisions had crossed the Rhine fully supplied. At 10 o'clock on March 24, the roar of aircraft engines intensified the chaos of the engagement. Operation Varsity commenced at this time, marking the largest single-day airborne assault ever undertaken, as an immense fleet appeared above the Rhine. This mission included upwards of 1,700 transport planes and more than 1,350 gliders containing 16,000 airborne and glider soldiers. Contrary to what German doctrine foresaw as a lone paratrooper drop, this was a tightly coordinated strike meant to reinforce the amphibious landings. Oberrichter Franz Huber of the 84th Infantry Division observed from his location near Hamminkeln. The skies darkened with aircraft overhead. Parachutes sprung open like a field of blossoms, numbering in the thousands. They assumed this was the primary attack, believing that the river crossings were diversions. Later, they discovered Americans had already advanced 10 kilometers behind their lines with their amphibious trucks. The airborne divisions, U.S. 17th Airborne and British 6th Airborne, made landings within gun range of the Rhine crossings, something the German leadership did not anticipate. Earlier airborne missions had seen paratroopers deploy far behind enemy lines to operate independently. This time, though, they came down just 6 miles from the river, directly aiding the amphibious units. The collaboration between air and amphibious troops multiplied their impact. DUKWs transporting ammunition and medical gear were able to go straight to airborne units, where in the past resupply would have required airdrops or linking up with advancing ground forces. In the subsequent days, wounded paratroopers were transported back to the West Bank in DUKWs, something not feasible during traditional airborne operations. Private First Class Donald Burgett from the 17th Airborne later described, "We were engaged at a crossroads when these odd-looking truck boats appeared. No splashing, no stuck vehicles. They simply rolled out from the forest like ordinary trucks, though we knew they had just forded the Rhine. The crew chief called out, 'Who needs ammunition?' We thought we were seeing things." By midday on March 24, the full extent of the DUKW-driven assault dawned on the German High Command. This was not merely an evolution in river crossing tactics. It constituted a fundamental change in amphibious supply logistics, undermining all previous assumptions in their defense strategy.